Education National Board will come to order. Call the roll, please.
Governor Kitzhaber. Here. Julia Brim Edwards.
Here.
Yvonne Curtis. Matthew Donegan. Samuel Henry.
Here.
Nicole June Maher.
Here.
Mark Movihill.
Here.
David Reeves. Ron Saxton. Here. Mary Spildy.
Here.
Kay Turan. Anna Vandering. Dick Withnow.
Here.
Before Mr. President, I just want to say, I think all of us are stunned by the violence that took place this morning at Rams High School. I can't imagine what could lead to that kind of violence. After the home, it seems to me that the school should be the place where children feel the safest. And I know this will spur another round of discussions, as it always does, about how we keep our homes and our communities safe. But for now, I just ask that all of us keep the victims and their families and all those who are traumatized in the school and the community in their hearts and in their prayers and in their thoughts. Okay, approval of minutes.
Governor, just to make a comment on that, I wasn't goofing off here. It says I was late, but I was on your behalf in Portland. And today I came in early, so the next time you can put, if I saw a parenthesis, early parenthesis, is that,
Let the record show that Mr. Withnell is never late, sometimes delayed, and on average is right on.
you can't understand what it does to me. Thank you.
Any objections to correct minutes? Very good. Order. And the motion, amended motion. Objection. Order. Nancy.
Okay, thank you. I also want to express my sadness and support and caring feelings for Reynolds School District, Reynolds High School, and the families and community. And just having been superintendent in Springfield, I know what this does to a community, and I know the kind of support that is needed not only right now, but for years to come. So I want everyone to know that Rob Saxon and I were already beginning to work. We'll be reaching out to the superintendent tonight, and Rob's staff is providing the kind of support, and we will too, just to make the transition the best it can be given the horrendous situation they've been faced with. So I did want to talk about a few other things. I did want to talk a little bit about keynote speech I gave recently, because it really was for an organization to help our homeless children, or our children who are couch surfing or have no place to live. And I remember as part of this keynote presentation, I said, how can you expect one child who goes home, has a great meal, has a bed, has parents who can make sure they get their special treat the night before testing? How can you expect that to be the same as a child living under a bridge, didn't eat the night before, doesn't eat before testing? How can we expect the same results, and what do we do to make sure it's an even playing field for children? So I'm really thrilled we're continuing to think about poverty to prosperity. I think it is just really critically important. And another thing we're doing related to that is we're really working actually with the Oregon Education Association, the governor's office, ODE, to say we know a summative evaluation is part of the system, but because that's a snapshot of one night when often kids don't have the same conditions going into it, how do we make sure we look at other forms of evaluation, like formative evaluation that happens every day, interim that happens probably on about a monthly basis, and make sure we have the balance so we can really see the whole picture of how our students are achieving. So those are some things I've been thinking about. Thank you.
Okay, we have the STEM Council, Mark Lewis and John Stewart, and Harvey Clark. Welcome.
All right. Governor Kitzhofer, members of the board, for the record, my name is Mark Lewis. I'm the Director of STEM Education for the OEIB and for the Chief Education Officer. I'm joined with two members of the STEM Investment Council here with me today, Aubrey Clark and Dwayne Johnson. The chair of the STEM Investment Council, Jim Pyro, sends his regrets. He's out of town at the moment, but he was very interested in being here today. We are very pleased to be here today to provide an update on the efforts of the STEM Council that we've been undertaking for the last 8 months. Give you a sense of how we're envisioning STEM and STEM education for the state and the types of work that we're going to be doing here in the future. In your packets, I hope you have copies of the PowerPoint as well as a couple of additional slides there. First, I just want to say that advances in STEM throughout history have made tremendous impacts on our lives, really. How we feed and serve 7 billion people in the world, how we consume information, how we move across continents, and how we communicate with each other. And in an exponentially changing times, the impact, the footprint of STEM is just growing even greater. Nearly all of the 30 fastest growing careers in the country are STEM careers, and I would put out there that I have not yet seen one career that is not a STEM job. Every single job requires a literacy in STEM, and it's critical for our aspirations as a state to drive economic prosperity for our communities and for the individuals, and to advance the goals of the 40-40-20. Here's the most common metaphor that we see in sort of the justification for STEM, and it's a good one. It's about the STEM pipeline, the leaky pipeline. The fact is that many of our industries are unable to find highly qualified workers to fill those jobs in STEM, and that even further, President Obama has put forward that it's also essential for our national security. However, there's also a lot more justifications for STEM and reasons for engaging in the STEM conversation as well. Here's the situation in Oregon regarding the leaky pipeline, and this data comes from Eco Northwest a couple of years ago. But you'll notice that on this slide, only 2% of Oregon graduates actually make it through the pipeline in STEM-related careers. That's nearly half of the national average.
Does that track no matter where they went to school or only if they stayed in Oregon?
I don't know the answer to that. I believe that this is drawn only from those Oregon graduates from Oregon institutions.
Mark, Whitney's shaking her head the other way.
I think it's analysis of wherever they went, whether they ended up with a degree.
I just think, my son
corrected.
and daughter are both engineers. They both grew up in Oregon, went to college outside of Oregon, so it's just capturing them. They came back to Oregon to work, so they had to be captured.
Some clarification, Mark. Is that, you said that's half, that 923 at the end, if you were to compare that to other states around the nation, that percentage is about half of what the other nations or other states are producing?
The percentage is half. So this is 2% at the end of that 5 years. And from a national perspective, it's 4%.
You know where we are in terms of the median?
I do not know, but I can get that information. One of the things that I'd like to do is draw your attention to some of the other justifications that people use that I've heard around in the national conversations in STEM, which I track very, very closely. And in your package, you'll find a spider diagram like this, also known as a radar plot. The page right before that gives you a list of 9 different sort of reasons I've heard from people about why they care about STEM. Has everyone found that page? Because what I'm going to ask you to do is take just a couple of minutes to skim through those 9 different points. And just to the left,
I don't think we've got that list.
We've got the
We've got the spider gram.
It's not in the PowerPoint, it's in the packets that you
Oh, in our packet,
have.
tab
It's in your packet, sorry about that.
Great.
The spider diagram's the same, but the list is actually in your packet separately. So what I'd like you to do is just take 2 minutes and beside each one of them rate from 0 to 10 what your perception of the level of importance of that reason is. So if you think it's really high in your estimation, the jobs pipeline, that's a really, really important for you and you want to rate that a 10, great. If equity jumps out at you, then rate that. So just each one, just go from your gut. Don't spend overtime thinking, don't overthink it, but just rate from 0 to 10. Don't rank order them. That's not what I'm asking, just individually. Being a former educator, I'm looking at eye contact and I'm saying, oh, we've got about 75% there. So if you could just turn to a neighbor and share with them your highest 3 rankings. 30 seconds only, so very, very short. Jobs, baby. Jobs, baby, jobs. All right. Thank you, members of the board. The reason why we did this exercise is to understand that as we talk to different constituencies, different metaphors, different reasons resonate with them. And this is particularly important when we're doing regional collaborations, which is so critical for the state. The jobs pipeline resonates without a doubt with policymakers, with industry folks, with economists, for very, very good reason, because it's critical, right? When I use that metaphor with educators, the vast majority of educators don't relate really well to that particular metaphor. They're in it more about the individual prosperity, the prosperity of the individuals, innovation, equity, and many, many other reasons as well. And so I wanted to put that in front of you to understand that in these conversations, there's a lot of common ground and complementary reasons why we should be focusing on STEM. To give you a sense of some data that I got from the Oregon Business Council, here's some of the differential impact that we see in terms of jobs earnings in STEM versus non-STEM careers at different education levels. And that translates directly into not only individual earnings, but it also means more tax revenues for the state. It means less reliance on social services, and actually I think we could easily make a strong case for it being a possible way to break cycles of poverty. Here's just a snapshot of the situation in Oregon that we see. Not only are we hearing from our industry members and from our data, but students graduating from high school really lack a lot of the fundamental literacy in STEM that's required not only to function in jobs, but also to go on to post-secondary studies, and frankly, to be full participants in today's technologically rich society. In terms of equity, the issue is really, really dire. Our students of color on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a nationally recognized standard that assesses proficiency in mathematics and science and other fields, shows that less than 20% of our students of color are performing at proficient or better. That's less than half of their white counterparts. Our industries are telling us that they're having a really difficult time finding local talent. They're importing a lot of their talent. And moreover, I think that STEM has a huge perception problem in that many of our students, many of our populace actually look at STEM as boring, unengaging, and frankly not for them. And we know that there are exciting STEM-related fields here in Oregon, whether you're talking about precision agriculture, whether you're talking about nanotechnology, high-tech manufacturing, forestries and fisheries. All of these are really exciting careers, and yet we withhold that excitement from our students oftentimes in the way that we approach teaching of math and science.
Good afternoon. I'm Aubrey Clark with Intel, a small little company out in Washington County, and proud to be an employee there. They provide me a job that I can go out and do education outreach, and most specifically in science, technology, engineering, and math. So it's like homecoming when I come back here because I see Mark Mulvihill, I see Duncan Wise around, and Whitney, and we started back in 2011 with Oregon Learns. And then everything kept getting moved forward, and it's just so exciting to see everything finally gel together. And we didn't want STEM left on the sidelines, and so with the encouragement of Duncan Wise and Representative Harker, Eric Meslow, we formed the STEM Employers Coalition, which quickly jumped into action, working alongside Representative Harker and Senator Steiner Hayward, ultimately resulting in the establishment of the legislative task force on STEM access and success. From that, we kept pushing forward, and we finally got to House Bill 2636 that created the STEM Investment Council. And last year, about this time, my colleagues Jill Island and Eric Meslow were in front of you, and I'm just here to provide you with a little refresher of what we were hoping and gearing the STEM Investment Council for. So I won't read through the slides, but in true business form, we like to go high-level goals and not really get into how we're going to get there, but really put some ambitious goals out there. And as you can read, by 2025, we want to double the number of Oregon's K-12 students who are proficient in math and science, and also double the number of post-secondary graduate degrees. Whoops.
Okay.
Don't throw that org chart up there yet. We're not ready for org chart. And then, as you can see from this slide, some of the key roles that we envision the STEM Investment Council being a part of, obviously working closely with Dr. Golden and the Education Office, providing support for policy and investment strategy, and then from a business perspective, really accelerating the change. In business, we move fast and furious, and we're hoping to bring a little bit of that zest across the line into the education world. And then, of course, progress, monitor progress and accountability. The second bullet out there, too, means a lot, I think, in a business dynamic, is outcome-driven investments. So really looking at helping work with the education piece of it, and really helping to invest in the importance of STEM initiatives and innovative initiatives that come down the road. And then there's the org chart, because everybody loves an org chart, no matter what party you're in. But this simply just shows, again, just kind of outlines some more of the strategic roles and the activities that the STEM Investment Council has been working on over the last 6-7 months, I guess. Clearly, we have a direct interface via Mark with the Education Office, and then over the months, we've heard from the HEC, we've heard from Oregon Department of Education, really, just showing that we're all working together coherently and really trying to get things all on the same page and aligned. And then to talk about the STEM Task Force and the STEM Employers Coalition, we really did jump in, and there's a lot of good work going on in the state even prior to this investment council, prior to the coalitions and task force mode. But Portland and South Metro STEM hubs and the Coast STEM hubs have been probably active for, 2 or 3 years. So they started moving before we joined in the game. And again, with that, it's just a collaborative effort with all the work that they've been doing, and then now joining with them. And then, of course, the Oregon Department of Education has always been a front runner in helping us lay the landscape and really pulling out those pockets of excellence that's happening throughout the state. And now, Mark.
Yeah, back to me. You'll notice there's a color coding code that's helping us guide who's speaking. I'm orange, so you'll note that anything that's orange will be me.
And then you can make me blue for Intel.
Yeah, blue for Intel blue. Absolutely, and Dwayne will be green. So I did want to just give you a summary of some of the investments that were made this last legislative session through House Bill 3232, investing in the world of work. That has went to the Department of Education around STEM and CTE in particular. And I've been working very, very closely with the Department of Education to get these RFPs out and to review the grant proposals that have come in, and then to support those who were funded to make them the maximum impact from those investments. There were 3 separate investments, one around the establishment of regional STEM hubs and a network of those hubs across the state. So similar to what we're seeing in the regional achievement collaboratives, these are multi-sector partnerships that come together within a regionally defined area to address a common need. That need can vary and will vary to find local solutions to those local needs. And then STEM/CTE/STEAM grants that were really targeting addressing the achievement gap or opportunity gap, equity issues through after-school and in-school programs, also connecting to the world of work. And then the final investment area was around STEM lab schools, of which 3 were invested in. And that lab piece is that this is not just another charter school, but it is a school that's focused on STEM, but also focused on making systemic impact. So how does that school then tie in with educator prep programs, teacher professional development, other schools in the area, tying into the middle school feeders, etc. So that's what that one is. And then finally, to give you a sense of, these are the hubs. The ones with the numbers are the ones that were actually received funding. The others were ones that we saw had tremendous promise, and we received applications from them. We did something a little bit different with these funds in that those who were unfunded, we withheld some of the money from going out directly to the field for technical assistance and to provide support for those unfunded hubs to participate alongside of the funded hubs in any sort of conversations around developing an evaluation framework, about strategies for moving forward, so that we were building capacity within the system from the very, very beginning. The little red diamonds are those places where the second area of funding, the STEM, STEAM, CTE funds, are impacting communities across the state. In some places they're closely aligned with STEM hubs, in other places they're not yet. And then finally, the 3 little yellow squares are where they're STEM lab schools.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Governor. My name is Dwayne Johnson. I am Executive Director of the Center for Inclusive Innovation, which is an initiative of the Technology Association of Oregon Foundation, what used to be TechStart. I'm also President of PDXO Globe 3 Ventures, which works with high-growth entrepreneurs and innovators on scaling their businesses. I am pleased to be a member of this STEM Investment Council because I believe it's one of the opportunities for us to really make a commitment to the possibility of innovation in our state and see STEM as the pathway to great careers in the future. So we started our group working together in November of last year. I was happy to be included in that group, and it's a very diverse group. And one of the things I recognized is the diversity actually helps a lot. So in November, we really sat down and started talking about what the possibilities of STEM were and how we might actually be able to knit together the fabric of what's happening around the state, because there's a lot of great work that's happening in pockets, but it's not really as integrated as it possibly could be. As we first met, we then found out that we'd be meeting a lot more often than we thought we would. But none of us really shirked away from that. We thought it was really, really important work, so we're happy to actually look at the schedule, as compressed as it might be, to be able to work through to June, where we'd be coming up with some recommendations. So in January, we began working with and talking to a number of the different practitioners, whether it be the higher ed or the secondary or the K-12. And I'll tell you, as a person that doesn't work in the education field directly, the first thing I noticed is that there were a lot of different groups. And it was interesting to try and get those all under control and understandable from our perspective. And I think the folks that were working with it directly had a better handle than we did. But I'll be honest, after the first probably 2 months, we had a pretty good idea of who the folks were that were showing up and where their interests and directions were. So to be able to take that and then start to craft what the strategies might look like, it's more or less what happened in the first couple of months of our meeting. So we worked with everybody, we talked with everybody from the state universities to the private industry folks, as well as the private universities, to get their perspective of what STEM looked like. And one thing you could see in the conversations with each of them is they all saw that STEM was very important, but they're grappling with how to actually make that happen on the ground and connect those dots together throughout the continuum. So we started looking at what that really meant from a relationship perspective. And interestingly enough, in the last meeting that we had, we started talking about this whole approach as really a continuum of activities that lead to the jobs and the companies of the future. And I mean, that was one of the things that was really key for us, which is where the whole conversation around STEM hubs really began to, at least in my mind, take shape. So you can go to the next slide. But one of the key pieces in that is, where does equity fit? Okay, we see pieces of the equity conversation when you're talking to teachers and you're talking to some of the administrators, but it's really, in some cases, not a central conversation where you're seeing the action happening. At least that's from Dwayne's perspective. We recognize that it's important, and we look at the shifting demographics, and we understand that we have to figure out how to get the equity into the equation. The way I like to put it in our center is like, I'd like to be able to take a pen and put it anywhere on the map of Oregon and have a student that's sitting there be able to see their pathways from that point all the way up to a career in STEM or starting a company here in Oregon that helps us be successful. So from that perspective, how do we do that? I had the pleasure of attending a ceremony where Representative Bonamici last week gave an award to the students that ran her first congressional district app contest. So this was at Sunset High School. And we walked into the room, and the first thing we noticed is that there were 2 women in a class of 40 people. We walked down the hallway, and you saw a very diverse group of folks, but there were only 2 women in the class, and no African Americans and no Latinos. So you look at that, and you ask, well, where are the folks, and what's going to get them into the room to participate? Well, I think that's part of what our key objectives are here as part of the STEM Investment Council. And that is really about how do we work together to create this pipeline of opportunity, looking at the traditional barriers that people would have to participating in these STEM areas. And as Mark said earlier, the idea of STEM doesn't really excite a lot of folks. I mean, it seems in many cases a lot of hard work for not a whole lot of payoff, as opposed to what can really be possible for folks when they're having fun and engaged in this work, really putting their hands on it, really being able to see how their skill set, whether it be math-oriented, science-oriented, or even creative, can really be able to connect to the opportunities that are there in our environment. Because our field has no problem with creating jobs. In fact, we have a surplus of job openings right now. What we're lacking is the people with the skills and the interest to be able to participate. So when girls and Representative Bonamici asked the question, said, why aren't there more girls in the classroom? And one of the girls said, well, because we don't necessarily feel that welcome here. We look around and we see the folks that are here and they don't look like us. And it's the very same conversation that more diverse populations have. I mean, I'm a tech entrepreneur and innovator, and I can't tell you the number of times I've been the only person in the classroom. So, but it's not just about us. It's about how do we actually create the opportunities for all of us to actually have these opportunities available. So when we talk about equity, how do we ensure that the tools, the learning, the teachers, the methodologies, all there that supports any student that has the interest and desire to be a part of this STEM environment to be able to step into it. So we've really boiled this down to of all the different suggestions and recommendations that we got, really 3 that touch on where we think we can have the most leverage. So the first one is really about the catalyzing the economic, community, and really the infrastructure of what is possible through STEM. And in some ways I look at it as how do we reconnect education with community? Because at the end of the day, education by itself is just a piece, is inert. When you actually put together the opportunities that the students have to be able to create and live into their futures, and we're being the stewards of that happening, you have to have the collaborative infrastructure to make that happen. So we see the investments in the relationships, the infrastructure, the community, and that the hubs provide is being key to that happening on a statewide basis. In way too many cases, we see individual group or small numbers of people working together to try and make something happen, but it just doesn't scale very well. And you might have someone not more than 2 miles away doing exactly the same work and struggling with that as well. So the hubs give us an opportunity to really take that to the next level, share the best practices, connect the people with each other so they can collaborate and scale those opportunities. The second is to actually invest in the P14 system. So if you look at the first step of that pathway, of that continuum, looking at all the way back as far as we can to enabling kids to participate in this STEM education environment. Recognizing that in some cases, whether it be computer science or STEM, really does have a bad, let's just say it's got a marketing problem. So when you go back to the earlier kids, they love this stuff. They love to play, they love to engage, and then somehow over the next, 8-10 years, we actually get that out of them. And then have them focus on just on test taking, or in some cases really have them check out. Well, investing in actually keeping that conversation and that interest alive throughout that continuum is really, really key. And the council will have a great opportunity to help with that, and being able to take a step back and seeing that not only do we help with the marketing conversation, shall we say, but we support the teachers and that those hub infrastructure to be able to deliver those relationships. And lastly, the post-secondary fund, we're looking at how to work with the community colleges and the higher education organizations to be able to once again work collaboratively, not only with the hubs, but with each other, and being able to facilitate the type of opportunities that I think we need as far as increasing the number of STEM educated people coming through with degrees, as well as being able to work with industry directly. So I think we've pretty much covered this slide, so we can go to the next one. I think that's back to you, Mark.
Just one quick question. So the second item, the P14 STEM grants program, is that meant to address, right now, we've put some money into STEM, right, creating sort of those opportunities, but you've got a lot of kids, many of them kids from generational poverty or kids from communities of color who aren't going to be qualified to get into those even if you have them available. So is this intended to address that issue?
I would say yes.
How?
Well, that's a part of that for you to decide. But we can certainly.
Ping pong.
Governor Kitzhaber, if I might interject there, the purpose of this middle strategy here really is twofold. One, I mean, the objective is actually to increase access across the state to both in-school and out-of-school STEM programming. That's to inspire and motivate more kids in STEM. There's two different levels of grants. One, they're from developmental grants, which are sort of that higher risk, shorter term, let's try something that looks like it's going to work. And then there's scale up or dissemination grants. Those proven practices or programs that have some evidence of success, and how do we scale those more widely across the state. So that's the point of that particular fund.
That's why he's.
Well, you talked a couple times about access, and in my personal experience, I go back on your slides, it's less about access and more about interest. That you go to your pipeline, and that, you have the line in here about classes are boring, and I mean, we systematically make science and math unsexy and unfun, and by the time kids get old enough to be making career choices, it's not what they're choosing. And so I at least like to hear a little more. To me, it's not access. We could have 1,000 classrooms open, eager to teach this, and no one would go to the classrooms. And so we have to have some way of going back and addressing that early teaching of how do we make this interesting instead of boring.
Well, I'd like to say one thing to that, and I think it's a little of both. So, for example, with the Technology Association Foundation's Innovation Academy, we actually see hundreds of kids that want to engage in computer science, but we don't have the capacity to actually have that. So whether we're talking about the number of teachers or access to the technology, that's a challenge. And when you look in the rural populations, I mean, you go out to the dolls and you look at the fact that they can actually tell you exactly how many drops of water they're using in their fields. Okay, so technology is in use there, yet they can't find people that can measure with a ruler in some cases. Why? Because in some ways there's a lack of interest. But part of what we're not doing is creating that interest and connecting it to the things that are happening in people's community. So I think you have to provide all of them. You have to give them the access as well as the maintaining their interest, and then in some cases letting them put their hands on it and then giving them capacity to actually be successful.
So does this get at all of the above then?
We would like it to.
As Governor Kitzhaber and Mr. Sexton, the STEM hubs, a lot of the work around the formal classroom system would be done through the STEM hubs in supporting teacher professional development, changing teacher classroom practices, working with the Department of Education and the specialists there who are phenomenal and have had a very strong vision of applied learning that really deeply engages students. There's other mechanisms for us to address some of those issues within the formal classroom system. There's also access. Not many of our students in poverty and our students of color actually have access to programs such as OMSI, to robotics, to Hatfield Marine Sciences, to High Desert Museum, to those other sorts of programming opportunities that many of our more prosperous families actually are able to access. So by access, I mean in that. From the formal school system, I have a lot of thoughts on some of the barriers that exist, and predominantly we see it start in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade is where we start losing our students. Before then, science is their favorite subject by far, science and art, and I would posit that those are very actually closely related. But we start then teaching science and math decontextualized from the real world. We start teaching it as a body of facts to memorize, not about the questions that drive science. No scientist stands around and talks about the answers, and yet that's how we talk. That's how we teach it. Scientists are caught up in the mysteries. Engineers are caught up in designing solutions to things that don't yet exist. That's what's exciting about science and engineering. It's not the facts that are exciting.
I apologize, I have a little bit of a cold. So I really appreciate the presentation, and I agree with many of the comments made about sort of equity and the barriers that exist, but I'm really struggling to actually see how the strategies and actually relate to getting a different equity outcome. And it would just be, I just can't quite put my finger on how what you're proposing and what you're doing will actually change experiences for children of color and children experiencing intergenerational poverty. You know, even, I appreciate the hub strategy, and yet when I look at the boards and the staff and all those pieces, you don't have a robust set of folks who have deep experience and a track record of increasing STEM experiences for children of color and folks in intergenerational poverty. So I hear the good intent, but I think if you could name like 3 strategies on how that will actually exist, and we've just invested, I think, $8.5 million now. We've recognized that barriers that exist, but I'm just not seeing how A leads to B.
Yeah, thank you. One, on the recommendations themselves, we will be putting forward to the outcomes and investments, the other subcommittee that's slipping my mind right now. We'll be putting forward a more complete, sort of explanation of each of these strategies and how they fit with the equity lens and other aspects, how they connect to the 40-40-20. In regard to the current grants that are out there right now, every single grant application grantee had to answer and respond to how that program addresses the equity issues in their particular region. So they had to provide demographics, they had to specify on how they would actually be recruiting, retaining, reaching those students of color and students in poverty in those programs. The STEM hubs themselves, many of them are focused very specifically. For example, the East Multnomah STEM Hub is focused very specifically on equity and diversity issues, working with their local partners. This Portland Metro STEM Partnership just brought in a nationally renowned speaker to speak around STEM and equity issues to their members of their partnerships. So I think that there's a strong dedication to seeing actual implementation of the beliefs and values within the equity lens. Are they still figuring things out? Yes. Do they need support? Yes. Can we provide that? I think yes. So I don't think we have the answers yet, but I think that there's really strong commitment to seeing that through.
I just have one more comment, and this is just related to a conversation we're having in philanthropy, and kind of goes back to the sort of question around access and intent, and may inform the conversations you're having as you build strategy. And the conversation we've been having is really a self-reflective look at how philanthropy has played a role in actually increasing the gap in access to STEM, in that we have traditionally funded many of the great initiatives that we know across the state that we all have a spot in our heart for, that really increase opportunities for students to learn. Great places like ONSI, the Children's Museum, actually all places that my family are members of course. And what you see when you go to those places, and I go regularly, is actually very few and often no children of color. And a lot of times folks think it's really an issue of access, and it is an issue about affordability, but it really has to do with who their leadership is and how they design their programs and how they build interest and relate to the changing demographic. So it's not that children and families are not interested, it's that it's really not a place built for them or by them. And as we think about our role in philanthropy, and I think the STEM Council could perhaps learn from this, we have over the years invested, and what we've done is given a ton of opportunities for privileged children, and not force those institutions to change and evolve and match our demographic, and really created a larger gap. And I would hope that you'd be very conscious of that and really mindful of your actions and maybe learn from some of our mistakes.
Thank you.
What I'd like to say, and I think that's a great conversation to start, and we would love to have you or someone from philanthropy come talk to us. That's one of the groups we haven't really heard a lot from. And I think that philanthropy actually does get to see a lot of the equity conversations that a lot of other folks don't. So when we talk about relationships and partnerships that are possible, in fact, I just had a conversation with Kairos, one of the new equity organizations in Portland, about how to move their initiatives forward. And I said one of the best ways to do that is to connect with the STEM hub, because what we can do is actually, when more and more organizations connect with those hubs, we can work together and actually have these equity outcomes happen. Otherwise, it becomes really individual groups coming forward. It makes it really hard for us to support. So when we're looking at that big conversation about inclusion and equity, The more folks we can have coming forward and being more visible, the easier it is for us to actually work together towards those outcomes.
If I might just,
Sure.
You know, Mark, you and I want to get to that interest comment that Ron was saying, and being a former elementary teacher and principal, science is something that the boys will actually, and girls will stay in to recess to do. If you have it done, hands-on learning, and you have the types of experimentation. To me, the STEM is the ultimate partnership initiative. I see this as the ultimate one where the crossover with private sector funding, resources, capacity is so obvious. And I just encourage you to keep reaching out. But maybe we start laser locking into this interest area. And I also see it as a resource with our higher ed institutions where, you know, we talk about job experiences and job shadowing a lot in high school. We don't do that at the university level as much. And at the elementary schools, if we're trying to look at interest, elementary teachers are not highly qualified in science generally. They're generalists. And science is very intimidating, especially when we have to get out the alligator clips and the baking soda. It's very intimidating. This might be like what we talked about with U of O, how we had that graduate, where we had the college students come in, the doctoral students, and teach the lessons at the elementary level. This might be an idea that we've got to get more adults into those early formative years and not just put it on a generalist to do that.
thank you.
You know, when I was hearing your question, Governor, about how do we make sure that our students in the opportunity gap truly see themselves and we provide the support to them to really make sure they have the opportunities and end up in these jobs because we need them in those jobs. And I think we can't isolate what's happening with the STEM Council from some of the other key initiatives we're doing. So I think of our early learning initiatives and how we're really working to have you know, healthy and stable families and making sure that our kindergartners come to school ready to learn. And in third grade, kids have reading proficiency. I think some of those start giving kids the basic skills that they really see and all the important exploration you're talking about in science, but I think we can't separate. And the other initiative we have that I think is really important is the teacher effectiveness, because you've really been talking about, and I know Ron said it there, is how do we really have teachers who know how to teach in a way that really engage students about what a wonderful career and how exciting learning it is. So I think we have to look at all of them to really make sure everyone has access to these careers.
So I had just a question. So I was trying to take the different slides and back map the investments to what you were trying to accomplish. So you have this chart that says, basically shows it goes down to just 923 receiving a STEM degree, but maybe it's not quite the right number, or close. And then your goal of what you want to have done by 2025, which is a little bit different set of numbers because this chart isn't, it's just a graduating from high school and going to college and then eventually getting a STEM degree. And then I look at your investments and I'm trying to back map how the investments, because they're hubs, programs, and I'm trying to see how, if you took your goal of, your goals of what you want to do by 2025, in terms of proficiency and graduates, and how these would actually track against helping move the students versus building programs. I guess is how do the money run through the programs and actually to help you achieve those numbers? Are these the right strategies to?
Yeah, thank you very much, Governor,
Sorry, that's
and
one question.
Representative Grim Edwards. I think that it certainly isn't adequately represented in the slides that you have in your packet. The STEM Investment Council has been looking across the P20 continuum about how do we really incent and prepare more students so that we can actually achieve those goals. In the post-secondary space, the Engineering and Technologies Industry Council has been doing extensive work in working with our four-year universities across the state to both do two things really, and you'll hear from them later on in this meeting today. But to provide the necessary supports to incent change within those post-secondary structures, to retain more students in engineering and to build capacity in those institutions, and build capacity to provide the necessary services so that they're graduating more students, and to also provide the necessary support so that those institutions are able to adapt to changing workforce needs. So we propose that in that post-secondary space, we're expanding that to actually move beyond just the engineering and information, computing and information sciences sectors to address additional sectors. So that's what we're thinking about in the post-secondary space, that there's already kids who are interested in these careers that are in the pipeline that we can capture. If we're actually trying to build more systemic change, we have to move further upstream. When we move further upstream, we know that it's about changing the practices that are existing within our K-12 system. We know that it's also about providing early learning opportunities to stimulate more, quite honestly, the foundations of STEM or imagination and play. And what we find is that the opportunity gap begins very early with the formation of neurological structures. And when children are in passive environments, they don't develop the same brain pathways that they do when they're in interactive spaces. So that we have to change what's happening there, obviously. We have to also change what's happening within our K-12 system about perceiving STEM and mathematics, and science is about facts and procedures to memorize. How we do that, we believe that very strongly the STEM hubs can make linkages to industry practitioners in order to help those areas come alive and provide the necessary supports to those teachers. There's phenomenal teachers already out there who are doing this work, but by and large as a system, we're boring kids to death in math and science. I mean, I have no other way of sugarcoating it. We have mathematically traumatized individuals in our society, an extensive number of them, and we need to address that. If I might just quickly move through the final slides of this, I know that we're running out of time, but I want you to get a sense of what also we're thinking here, and that is that the acronym itself is a dangerous acronym. It's not well understood. It doesn't have a particular meaning other than 4 words that people are trying to force together. Well, that's dangerous in and of itself because we are meaning-making individuals. OEIB, we can say Oregon Education Investment Board. Okay, I know what that means. I don't know what everything we do, but I know what it means, right? STEM, who knows? And so people start challenging what that means, and all of a sudden people start adding things to it. Well, I've been left out of the picture too, so it's about STEAM, right? Let's put arts in there. I actually very much am a supporter of including arts in this conversation because I believe that the roots of STEM are in imagination and curiosity and creativity and wonderment, and that is the foundation of STEM. So, yes, arts, great. STREAM, reading's been left out of the picture. Okay, let's add an R. STEM, and for people, whether you're in the medical field or whether you're a music teacher, you want to add another M. S squared, TEM, for those sociology or people in social studies who are also the left out of the equation oftentimes, particularly in elementary school. And then one of my favorites is ST squared, REAM, the extra T for thematic instruction. So we have to move beyond the acronym to the deeper understanding of what constitutes STEM and what is it all about. Here's one of our challenges. The outcomes that we're currently using to measure and to incent change in this field are quantifiable outcomes. They're great, in terms of giving us something that are numbers, okay? Double in the number of test scores, double in the number of degrees. But this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. I'm a big data guy, and I am very skeptical about most numbers that come in front of me. And so I just wanted to put this quote out there and to understand that the STEM Investment Council, it cares a lot more than just the degree production here, but what we're doing to really help people better be contributors to society at large, as well as to just navigate the world that's technologically rich and and changing rapidly. So this is what a question that we asked 150 people from various sectors at the STEM Leadership Summit at the end of April. So okay, what are those skills that are necessary to be successful? It's a great one. Here are their answers. This is a word cloud generated in real time with those 150 people. The frequency of response, the greater the frequency of response, the larger the word here. You will notice nowhere on here is mathematics proficiency, even in the small print. And it's partly because I biased the question. Okay, I'll say that. I biased the question. Okay, but what skills, attitudes, dispositions are necessary to be successful? You get these sorts of things. So if these are what we really value in our system, how are we aligning our practices to get that? And I think that that's an important question for us to ask as an OEIB as well. Are our practices aligned with the types of outcomes ultimately that we're trying to achieve with the system? And so I'd like to give you yet another definition of STEM that I've played with over time to try to get a better sense of how do I capture the essence of STEM. And I just want to leave you with that.
Governor, and we really, Mark and friends, we really appreciate this, and I'm hoping, because I have this dual hat on the state board, is to see this aligned up better with the new next generation science standards, in which we challenge the whole teaching and try to point it in a direction like that. I love your work. I think it's fantastic. We're hoping to have some greater synchronicity. And I have long since, and Rob has heard this so many times, he's sick of it. I pulled my daughter out of a high school because they were science clubs, and both her mother and her grandmother were scientists. And that didn't fit our needs, and the fact that she was black and Latina also didn't meet our needs. There are a lot of folks in the community who are looking for this to happen, and who are hoping that we can get the whole act together. About 3 or 4 miles from here, out at the School for the Deaf, we have a charter school, and I was out there about 2 months ago and watched this wonderful kindergarten teacher teach a science lesson that had the kids just jumping up. I mean, they were squirming anyhow, but they were jumping up for the science part of that. And my hope and my dream is that this makes a difference in terms of both the way we teach science, the way we select people who teach science, and also the outcomes that we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I do want to assure the board that we are closely integrating with the other initiatives here at the OEIB, from anywhere from accelerated credit to the network of quality teaching and learning, the effective implementation of the Common Core and the next generation science standards. So thank you very much for those comments.
Just a request for Dr. Golden. In the sort of integration of this work, it would be helpful when we have presentations on the grants that they back map off of what we're trying to, so I'm searching like what's our role versus the state board's role and everything else. They back map off what we're trying to accomplish in terms of the 40-40-20, and that I think we've had a discussion about the transition points are the most effective. So really focusing in on how the investments that are being recommended, how they directly connect to that. Just so then we can click, it's easy to make the click down, and then I think foster greater confidence in that eventually these investments will be. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, hiring coordination, Richard.
Thanks, Governor. Members of the board, I'll kick off really to introduce a member of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, Larry Roper, who will give the bulk of the presentation. Larry In addition to his role with the HAC, is a vice provost for student affairs at Oregon State University, and he chaired the higher ed, or the financial aid work group, whose report you'll receive today. You may wonder, what's your role and why this report? Well, the short answer is you asked for it. In September or October, you adopted a request of the HAC that we come back to you this spring with recommendations about how to better use the state's investment in financial aid. And what you're about to hear is likely to be a centerpiece of the HAC's recommendation to the governor and this board and the legislature for affordability in post-secondary. And we're looking here for your feedback, your response, your thoughts on these recommendations related to the Oregon Opportunity Grant. And just a little bit of additional context, that's the state's roughly $100 million biennium investment in need-based financial aid for students attending Oregon public and private post-secondary institutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Larry.
Good afternoon, Governor, board members. So I'd like to just sort of describe sort of the flow of our work, some of the principles that underlie our work, as well as then our recommendations. We'd like to do that in an expedient way as possible. If you look at the first sheet, the first slide, it really just describes sort of the flow of our work. With the bottom being the way that we distilled the charge into a simple goal to recommend a restructured Oregon Opportunity Grant that will both achieve the goal of improving access to higher education, vocational and technical education for promising, financially needy, underrepresented students, and to stimulate the state's achievement of 40-40-20. As the group went through our work, we did lots of levels of analysis, and we tried to tie it to what we believe to be some important markers on the landscape, including having a really clear vision for a program, tying it to 40-40-20, really trying to focus on rewarding success and completion. So moving past just the notion of access, but thinking about how we could structure it in order to have achievement. And then, of course, running into the issues related to the funding of the model. The work group process and membership, there was a broad representation in terms of membership from both folks who are in higher education community, independent post-secondary sector, treasurer's office, Oregon Community Foundation with a philanthropic perspective. We convened for the first time in November. Between November and April, when we delivered our report, we had 10 public meetings. We invited public testimony from a broad range of stakeholders. One of our key activities was to have an extended retreat with Nate Johnson from the Strategy Labs, which is supported by the Lumen Foundation. They flew out and spent some time with us. When we look at the shared responsibility model, it's very clear that the concept of shared responsibility is a strong one, but the allocation methodology doesn't support it and doesn't build the efficacy that we would hope that it would have. So if you look at just the sheer numbers, and we'll have some slides that look at this more specifically, we awarded for the 13-14 academic year 34,000 plus grants with over 190,000 students eligible for the grant. So we severely undermet the need, as well as with a $2,000 flat funding, we undermet the fact that it's supposed to be at the last dollar in, it's supposed to complete the student's financial aid picture. So if you look at the slides, it's just more of a graphic presentation between 2007 and this year. The top line showing those who are eligible for the grant, and then the bottom line showing those who actually received the grant, either for first term or the number receiving it for the entire academic year. The next slide sort of offers a clearer picture in terms of looking at the cost of attendance at 2-year public, private was used as sort of the standard rate, and the 2-year, the 4-year and the 2-year. And in the end, you look at the bottom line, that there is the remaining need is still significant with the $2,000 award for students with zero estimated family contribution and no tax credit. That we find that those students are significantly in need. So if we look at the recommendations, we recommend that we restructure it to focus on improving access and completion for the most financially needy students. And that the grant be focused on students characterized by high promise and high need. And our notion of promise means that by virtue of being admitted to an institution or enrolling in an institution, that demonstrates promise. And then the need will be demonstrated through financial means tests. And so our goal is to, again, for the students with the highest financial need. The eligibility criteria will still be determined by FAFSA. We really are considering that we recommend that we do away with the $70,000 income level cap that was that has been historically used for the grant. That in looking at the allocation, that we look at sort of those with the highest need first. So the pool first, those with the highest need. And then within that group, special focus on underrepresented racial and ethnic minority students. Again, that was a dimension of our charge to respond to the question of how would we ensure that there still is attention brought to or awareness of the needs of racial and ethnic minority students. And again, this is based on the OEIB equity lens definition. And then that all the other criteria, initial eligibility criteria, remain the same. So in terms of our award process, again, that the grant focus on improving access to post-secondary higher education, while at the same time promoting retention and completion. And so what we believe in our process is that we would want to essentially guarantee the grant for the first 2 years of attendance. And that the first year be determined based upon, renewal be based upon students meeting progress and achievement benchmarks. And those benchmarks, basically, the advice that we got is based upon what students know how to do, which is they know how to accumulate credits. And so it will be based upon students showing academic progress based upon accumulating credits. And beyond the second year, that renewal be based upon sort of an escalated performance criteria. Again, we recommend that there be a group that will determine what those performance criteria will be, but again, it will be tied to credit hour accumulation and indications that the students are on progress to complete. So again, we want to sort of turn it from an access grant to a retention and completion grant beyond the first 2 years of attendance. When we look at the award size, we think that it really should be based upon the circumstance of the student and that there should be variable grant amounts. And all the research we did showed there's no such thing as a meaningful grant, sort of a comparable meaningful grant. That meaningful is based upon the individual life circumstance of the student and what will help that student to persist. And so one of the things that we found was that our current process with the grant does not allow for any incentives or predictability. That student wouldn't know from 1 year to the other if they would do that. And we believe that by essentially having the students be guaranteed the grant for the first 2 years, that they would know that it is a reliable source of financial aid, and that their ability to stay enrolled in college would be stable in terms of support. We also think that it would be important for us to consider approaches to stabilizing the cost of education. And that would, again, involve sort of a coordinating role in terms of looking at the contributions of the state, the institution, private funders, and others in order to think about how do we hold the students' costs consistent while manipulating those other factors in terms of the funding of education. We also recommend that there's a rolling deadline in terms of applications. Right now, it's on a first-come, first-served basis, which again rewards a particular sector of our state in terms of those who are already sort of in the system and have access to certain resources. The other thing that we said, we moved beyond the Oregon Opportunity Grant to think about sort of this bigger picture, and particularly the bigger picture of how do we incent the pipeline. And we recommend that that OEIB or the Oregon Legislature or someone would prioritize for us to create a pipeline incentive program which would essentially establish for students as they start middle school or leave the 6th grade or at some point an account into which funds would be deposited based upon those students achieving educational benchmarks. So again, it's accumulating credits, it's taking certain kinds of courses, but that by some point in that student's experience, they should be able to look back in their account and say, here's how much the state has invested in an account for me to pursue post-secondary education or educational experiences beyond the high school years. And again, we think that there should be a group that should be charged to look at this. So in summary, our recommendations are to restructure the Opportunity Grant to focus on improving access and completion for the most financially needy students, that we prioritize funding for underrepresented racial and ethnic groups based upon the OEIB equity lens. Again, we've asked that there be sort of a legal vetting of this as an appropriate direction, realizing all the things that are occurring on the national landscape related to targeting of financial aid. That we adopt requirements for student academic progress and achievement as part of the eligibility and renewal criteria. And then that we endorse predictability as essentially guaranteeing awards for the first 2 years of attention. That we strengthen the efficacy of the shared responsibility model by pursuing additional funding to more fully meet the current and future financial needs of students. Again, we are significantly underfunded in terms of the actual need versus what's available for allocation through the Opportunity Grant. And then that we establish a work group to develop an implementation plan for the recommendations that we offered. And then that we recommend that HEC and OEIB consider separately from the Opportunity Grant recommendation a pipeline affordability commitment for K-12 low-income students. And then the final slides essentially reiterate some of the things that are in the earlier slides.
So, Governor, members of the committee, I think at this point we would be interested in your questions, comments, responses, feedback as the HEC receives your input about how to move this forward. The HEC has adopted and endorsed the recommendations. The work group brings it forward now for your sort of feedback and potential consideration in the budget that we'll bring forward to the governor for his and policy that we'll bring forward to the governor for his consideration and inclusion in his recommended budget and policy packages.
I think they're excellent recommendations. I really support all of them. I think it's excellent work. Really, I think back to the days when we had the Underrepresented Minority Achievement Scholarship and how that significantly improved rates of students attending our institutions of higher ed. I was on that scholarship as well, so I certainly saw the impact it had on my life and many other folks. The one piece of advice I would give you is just that certainly when it comes to getting legal advice, I think you'll certainly encounter different perspectives. Some folks tend to be very risk adverse around this issue, and I would just encourage you to really really think about the vision you want for Oregon and think about doing the things that really matter for the future of the state as it pertains to representation. And if we get advice that comes back that is very restrictive, I think there are many models around the country where other systems have figured this out quite well with some creative strategies, and so I think we can really find a way to implement what you're recommending regardless of what that legal advice is. So I'm excited to see what that looks like.
Just a little troubled by the term high promise and what that the connotation. You're going to have to explain what that means, just like you did, Larry. You did a great job immediately. This is what it meant. But in kind of branding, you're going to have to explain that term. I love what the idea behind it, and maybe what a term could be is on track. That's a term we've been using, tying it to the achievement compact indicators, kind of where you were going. Maybe it's something where you look at student on track, where you've met these benchmarks, your attendance, these types of things, and we can embed that into where we're going, where we already are in K-12, rather than high promise. Just that connotation, I think, is one that's going to make people kind of pull back on the judgment call. Especially when we're trying to get access to the kids that we're talking about on here. That term can be one that can mismessage. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's and in our thinking, it was really not about an assessment of the individual. It was about the posture of the institution toward the student. That by virtue of admitting a student, you were recognizing that a student had high promise. So now it was really more about the institution's behavior in regards to support for their students and their retention, as opposed to some way that we assess the student to determine whether they have promise.
That's a real important distinction, if there's a way to kind of get that on the front end.
Yeah, exactly.
So just kind of similar, maybe slightly different approach to that, because I was wondering, so you said your definition of high promise, blah, blah, we might be changing that, was that they had been admitted. So does that mean if you had been admitted and yet you are required to take remedial classes, you would still be considered high promise? So I think that's worth a longer discussion about, you hear stories of students who use their grant money for having to use it for remedial classes that they don't get credit for. And then they sort of got on a cycle that's really not sustainable. And then when you add in the new benchmarks, which I think are good, that you're making academic progress, but I think we're setting students up to maybe not be successful in that second year. So I think that deserves sort of another look. But how do we address that? Because I think it's a real issue. The other issue I had is, what does all this cost? What's the incremental cost that if we said yes, we think these are good recommendations, what would they be? Maybe you can divide it between the base and then that other the middle school, high school grant program.
So Larry may be looking up more precise figures. I'll just say that the cost depends on how you constrain, how you approach these recommendations, like the extent to which, for example, you limit access in order to target on first-year students, right? If you take wholesale these recommendations to really focus on a narrower set of students, then you can increase the award size without incurring huge significant costs. If you want to provide the award to students in their first and second, and many of them in their third and fourth years, the cost, of course, goes up significantly. So I think this has created some additional levers for us to get at, to make it, to have a greater impact at any cost level. But clearly, the unmet need is significant.
Yeah, and I think it really is a matter of whether or not you want to make it available to everyone who has some need, or whether or not you want to say that there's sort of an income sector that you want to look at, or a needs sector that you want to look at in terms of access. So it could go up to $700 million a year if you say everybody who has some need would be eligible for the grant and would be fully awarded.
So you're not coming actually with a recommendation of how much at some point in the future you are?
Absolutely. We'll be working within our budget development process to bring forward sort of what our best efforts to reflect what we think is both practicable and desirable. It's going to involve striking some balances there.
Here's an idea for you if you really get this packaged correctly. This is going to be an ask from the state of Oregon, but how about an ask at the local level if you really broke it down? Like for instance, how you have the costs per, and you have the student share, the family share. I'm thinking about all the civic groups that I work with that give out scholarships, thousands of dollars every single year, that just think about how easy this could be if you had a waiting list. Like the Head Start waiting list, the OPK grant, we picked up some more slots. We knew exactly how much, we knew exactly what the need was. We have this much unmet kids that aren't funded at the state level. Very quickly, you could show people, this is what the state's contributing, this is what the parents are contributing. We need this, we have this many wait lists in Pendleton. And I could go to Rotary and say, let's fill 10 of these. And it's all broken down and the dollar figure is there. What potential that could be to scale it up from other resources if people really knew.
Governor, I think, Sam, I think we called those, the old Commission of Families and Children unserved list, not waiting list. A little bit of difference there.
Yeah.
But the concept's the same.
Yes, exactly.
So I was wanting to know about the quantification, that's coming later, right?
Yeah, Governor, I mean, one place to start is the unmet need under the existing program. You know, attempting to close the gap between what we, when we designed the program back in 2005, 2006, and it began implementing in 2007. So what we designed and what we're currently funding, that gap is somewhere in the range of $400, $500 million a biennium. That's unmet need. We've attempted to bring forward a proposal that would say, if we can't fill the entire gap, if we can't meet every piece of unmet need in the state, how can we target those dollars more effectively in order to produce a greater impact? Focusing on the first 2 years, focusing on underrepresented students, focusing on students who are making progress beyond their first year. And so we think there's, under whatever budget constraints the legislature is required to operate, you know, we think you're going to have some opportunities to maximize the impact of the program. Obviously, I think the interest of my commission will be in maximizing affordability and putting as much into this redesigned program as possible, but understanding there will be some significant constraints.
I think the addition, you have to be careful with this, but I mean, you don't just want to give people access, you want to make sure that they actually get a degree, right? And at some point, you don't spend enough, or you spend it at the wrong time, or on the wrong people, so you're spending resources that don't. So if you could get a system where if you were going to invest money, you knew they were going to come out, that makes it much easier to make the case to bump up the size of the investment. And so that kind of data would be really important to the
level to contribute to it.
And I also wonder about, there are some institutions who are better at getting results with underserved students than others, and I don't know if there's some way to incentivize that, so it might inspire some of our institutions who struggle with that to recognize that if they did better at that, they may have access to more resources to support their tuition.
Mr. Chair, Nicole, I'll just take that as an opportunity to flag other work that the HEC is launching now. It's been underway for several years with community colleges, launching now with universities to change how we allocate the larger amount of state dollars, the underlying institutional funding that the state provides, partly on the basis of outcomes and with a particular priority around completion of, you know, student success for underrepresented students. We're beginning it. We'll have more to say about that in a few months.
Great. Thank you. Our last, All right, so we're going to take a 10-minute break.
All right, let's reconvene, and our next agenda item is a report from the Engineering and Technology Industry Council. Eric.
Thank you very much. Dr. Golden, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Eric Meslow. I'm the president and CEO of a technology company in Portland called TimberCon. I'm also the current chair of the Engineering Technology Industry Council. I also, for the record, sit on the STEM Investment Council, and I am co-chair of the STEM Employers Coalition.
And your son's Little League coach.
What's that? Yeah, a little, you know? Yeah. For the record, I always like to say I have a very supportive business partner who takes over the running of the company while I do education issues for the state of Oregon. The purpose of this meeting today is pretty straightforward. We want to... I'm a technology guy. Maybe I can pull us off. I actually build computer cables, so there you go. Purpose of this meeting is pretty straightforward. ETIC has been an organization that's been around for over 15 years. Traditionally, we have reported directly to the Oregon University system. With the changes in that system, it was important that we had a new home, and that home now is at the foot of this committee. So I'm here today to brief you in, get you up to speed on what we've done in the past, where we're going in the future, give you some ideas of some of the challenges we have, and then most importantly is to ask what you believe you need as a committee to do your job in our oversight. First of all, let's decode the acronym. Engineering Technology Industry Council. Essentially, we are a volunteer high technology advisory board consisting of senior executives and from technology companies from across the state of Oregon, both small and large. And we were designed to make recommendations about how to address the talent gaps in technology. Goals are facilitated by investing both state and private funds in Oregon's public education institutions for engineering and computer science. Ultimately, we provide a recommendation to council. Council votes on it, and then that directly affects funding to the state's institutions. Traditionally, our role has been with the 7 higher ed institutions plus OHSU, but our charter also allows us to work within the community colleges, and we have done significant work even down into K through 12 over the years where necessary. ETIC at a glance, pretty straightforward. Starting July 1st, as previously mentioned, we are yours. We did get formed in 1997, Senate Bill 504, under Governor Kitzhaber's first term. Our fund is currently $29 million per biennium. Again, as I mentioned before, we serve all 8 Oregon universities. The advisory council, made up of folks from industry, are voting, but we do very much value our non-voting members, made up of industry associations as well as higher education institutions, including the deans of most of the engineering schools and/or provosts. And then we also have additional connections to other organizations of similar missions. We currently have a voting seat on the Oregon Innovation Council, and we work in the past with the Higher Ed Coordinating Commission. Our mission by statute is very straightforward. It's to meet the urgent industry needs by upgrading our existing talent coming out of those institutions that provide them. Ultimately, we need to decide as an industry group those priorities, and we try to avoid duplicating existing resources. So if one institution is doing something, we try not to create it at other institutions. Instead, we generally try to magnify how it's working within an existing system. We try to make sure that resources are shared across the institutions by getting institutions to collaborate together. This was a side effect of the law, but ultimately it's been great to see getting the University of Oregon and OSU and PSU and the regionals all work together where one is not strong, many often is. The results, as an industry group, we focus on results. It's how we're wired. We're metrics folks. We ultimately measure our investments, making sure that they're being used appropriately by the schools. And those schools that show good track records generally get the benefit of the doubt in future presentations and future funding opportunities. And then we also generally support and require significant private investment for any dollars that the state invests. So one of the tenets of ETIC is if $1 of ETIC money coming in from the state is invested, we require the schools to go out and find matching funds either in the form of federal grants or private company dollars. As I mentioned before, the authority needed to change, and we did so through a bill that passed in the last short session. Ultimately, ETIC believed that the OEIB was the right choice because it provided a safe harbor as a lot of higher education decisions are being made. ETIC, where it needs to be placed, what our mission is moving forward. We thought it would be best to be out of the fray of being in the Higher Education Coordinating Committee. We spoke with Dr. Golden about this, and we spoke with Ben Cannon about this, and ultimately that is what was decided as the best tact. Ultimately, we are seeking a long-term home, and we're spending this time in our safe harbor in calm waters to figure that out. And that has lots of different possibilities. Some are essentially staying similar to our mission, but there are some very interesting things that are going on in regards to expanding our mission and placing ourselves as part of the STEM Investment Council, for example, or in a variety of other locales. As I mentioned before, we're currently at about $29.2 million per biennium. That money, if you were to look at it closely, is broken down into two types of investments. About $22 million of that money goes into supporting long-term faculty track salaries within the institutions. ETIC was all about building capacity for about the first 14 years of its existence, and that requires supporting those faculty after the hiring process is complete within the institutions. About $7 million of the money is used as essentially a greenfield investment fund, where we go in and make short-term investments in the institutions to take away roadblocks or barriers for schools to implement new programs that the industry believes that are required. That is where the ETIC Council feels like they provide the most value, where we look at these needs that the state may have and ultimately working with the institutions to come up with creative ways to break down barriers, leverage money, and ultimately meet the state's needs when it comes to graduates. In September of this month, ETIC will be coming to this council to recommend our FY 2015 funding allocation. That is currently under negotiation with the institutions. We've been working with Ben and the schools and coming to agreement on how we believe the sustaining money, or the $22 million, should be allocated amongst the schools long term. And then the $7 million of greenfield investment is actively being worked by the council in regards to those investments for the next biennium. Ultimately, as I mentioned before, this council has been in existence in a long time. We had a kind of a rhythm and a working relationship with the Board of Higher Education and the Chancellor, who ultimately were our bosses. It's now on to you, and it's very important for me to figure out what you guys believe you need to understand about our organization, how we work, what our priorities are, so we can best inform you and help you guys can help make decisions with us on where our talents and our efforts should be placed. As well as there are some long-term decisions to be made as well, much larger asks, and we'd be very interested in understanding the OEIB's position in regards to those. Again, we're currently working with the STEM Investment Council very, very closely. Again, I'm a member of that council in regards to how we can pull all these things in together under one roof, so we have some synergy and some continuity between our efforts all the way from pre-K all the way to grade 20. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions?
I think the key message was last one, coordinate.
Absolutely agree. Again, I want to make a strong point that under our guidance at the university system, it was quite clear at OUS that our primary mission was focused on the four-year institutions. Under the OEIB, we've already changed our bylaws and our guidance to very much strengthen the work at the community college level. It can be argued very, very quickly that the middle 40 of the 40-40-20 plan has the most opportunities for the work that we do in regards to investing and breaking down barriers.
So my understanding is, given what you just said, that there will be some examples of some seeding of community college programs and directions.
Absolutely, sure.
Thought I heard that. Sounds good for me.
Yeah.
What's results mean to you? You measuring your performance, measuring your results,
So, absolutely. Traditionally, ETIC measured two things, and two things only, at the very highest level. We had a baseline metric for the number of graduates the university system was producing within certain graduate fields. Our investments went into those schools, and we tracked at the individual school level and in total the new graduates that were produced with ETIC money. Looking at very specifically if $1 million is invested, it's brought into these programs, what is the tick up, so to speak, 4 years later in regards to the number of graduates being produced. That was our primary responsibility to reporting to the legislature and to the governor and everyone else for the first 15 years of this organization. Other metrics that were always important to us, though, were the leveraging that those dollars also did. So we measured very specifically if the state has invested, for example, $170 million of ETIC money over the last 15 years in these incremental efforts, how much private money was brought in based on those investments. And that number is over $300 million of private money was brought in to magnify those investments by the state. That's another metric that we've traditionally measured. We've tried the best we can as a group of individual business folks to stay out of the day-to-day operations of the individual schools. So we do not go down into and investigate things like efficiencies of particular professors that we invest in, or the efficiencies of graduation rates or retention rates of those schools. Those are things that are often talked about around the edges as we're trying to understand the challenges that the schools have. Moving forward, I think there's this opportunity to measure other outcomes than we currently are measuring. And that will be decided upon over the next few months.
Well, can I follow up? Well, how do you answer though for the general public who's, sees the number of 46th in the nation or their education here, and we're 50th in an achievement gap, and how's all that? And you've been in this for 15 years, and are you making the sub to that? Are you making comparison data to our own family versus how are we doing with all the rest of the U.S. on that same dollar investment to another state or something? How well are they doing? I mean, I don't know, it's just, I get this, after a meeting like this, I run into somebody, they say, well, how are we going to be better? How are we going to be in the top 10 in the nation? How are we going to do it? So how do you answer that with...
I can answer that. I'm not the most politically correct guy. I'm a business guy, and I get in a lot of trouble very quickly.
You're talking to the right guy.
Right.
You're really talking to the right guy.
You may even get Ron involved.
I can just tell you my executive director is in the back row right now is probably cringing, as well as Mr. Lewis over here. I will attempt to answer in this way. I know where we would be if it wasn't for ETIC in some ways.
So we'd be 55th out of 50.
Quite possibly. One of the most practical things I can say that would have an impact. Portland State University would not have an engineering program at today's date if it wasn't for the ETIC funding over the last 15 years. The state of Oregon has systematically divested money from the higher education system over the last few years. ETIC money in many ways was meant to plus up those budgets, but in many ways it became a lifeline for many of those institutions. We have absolutely become a third of the operating budget in many of the institutions for the schools of engineering, which was never intended to be our purpose. But ultimately, industry fought hard for those dollars within each legislative session to be able to compete. So to answer your question, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. We're 46th in the country. I would say that our engineering schools are much better than that. OSU has a very large school in the number of students being produced. I can tell you that the gap for industry within the state of Oregon is huge in the number of students that we need to come out of those institutions and be employed in the state of Oregon. My peers have massive numbers of job openings that we're currently having to go out of state to get. The problem is there. $29 million sounds like a lot of money incrementally, but I think you can hear that only 7 of that is actually incrementally making any change in the state of Oregon per biennium, which is nothing in these organizations. So if I were to really take off my hat and start dancing here, I'd tell you that what the state needs to do is double down, triple down, quadruple down in regards to its investments in these high value degrees that are going to move this state forward while giving opportunities to our citizens. I can tell you we do a great job with what we're given. We fight for more every session. We've been in a situation in the last 6 years, obviously, of fighting budget cuts as opposed to getting any new dollars to do new things with. But out of that comes an interesting situation where we now have the OEIB, we now have the HEC, we now have a governor and a legislature in place that are interested in doing something around STEM and doing something very creative. So I've been doing this about 10 years. This is the first time in those 10 years I've seen all those organizations or all those interest groups aligned. We also have a very strong economy in this area so that the industry folks are aligned behind it very strongly. The end result is I think there's a great opportunity here that we're staring down, and personally, myself and everybody on my council, as well as folks on the STEM Investment Council, are interested in pushing forward and doing something dramatic here in this next biennium.
So Eric was asking if we needed any more information, background, or guidance, because we'll be making a decision about the funding allocation in September. For my own part, the report was really well done and answered all the questions that I had, so thank you for that.
Well, my ED is fantastic, and Laura McKinney did a fantastic job. I mean, when I read it in its rough draft form, I was like, she got it, right? And she's only been on the job a year, and she absolutely understands the issues that we're dealing with and is helping us guide through a difficult and political process. I mean, this is a lot of change coming to a lot of people, and it can be difficult, but ultimately, an industry council that's volunteer isn't there to be quietly do whatever the crowd wants to do. We're here to balance what our needs are and push a little bit. And again, I apologize if I'm not the most politically correct person in the world, but at the same time, I think we need a little push here and there every once in a while.
Chair, does ETIC give a briefing for the state legislature?
Yes,
Okay.
consistently. Higher Ed Board, or the Higher Ed Committee. In lieu of it, we've done the main ed committee as well as I make sure Ways and Means understand what's going on as well.
Good addition.
Yeah, I think the way you concluded and what Ron came up with initially was really, I think in my mind, continued funding, increased funding is tying to the STEM work. I mean, to me, I learned a lot today, but I can't help in my mind, I'm just on the superficial level that I got today, how does this align? How is this not one, this is obviously an older initiative, but how is it tying into the new initiative? What kind of funding, what's the potential? To me, that's the answer.
Well, that's what we're working on right now. I can tell you right now, if you look at those open STEM jobs, engineers, the thing that we've traditionally been worried about at ETIC, isn't in the top 5. You got to go right to healthcare, manufacturing, and other industries. And you have not just 4-year degrees, but this is very important. You have certificates and you have these 2-year associate's degrees. And that's why we believe a mission moving forward is deeper in regards to us working with different levels of education, but also broader, working with healthcare and higher manufacturing, and perhaps if we can get the right group together, agriculture and forestry, which are all critical industries that use technology in everyday life.
And are getting that format with a regional achievement collaborative.
Yes.
Regional solutions, it's combining those would be the avenue for the regional implementation.
And it's important to know that although our focus at ETIC has always been higher ed related, we understand the pipeline very, very specifically. We had an organization within our own group called OMEP. OMEP funded things like WordTalk, the robotics, Saturday Academy, and all these other after-school programs to try to get that pipeline full of kids that could arrive at the universities and be successful in these very challenging degrees. What I'm excited about now is OMEP was getting exactly about $1 million per biennium to do that mission. We now have STEM Investment Councils who's here to ask and talk about real impactful budgeting numbers. And so I'm really happy to see that part of the mission to get included in the STEM Investment Council.
So thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you in September.
Thank you very much.
Let's move on to the Chief Education Officer evaluation process. Julia.
Thank you. So if the board members look at tab 6, you'll see the final process for the Chief Education Officer evaluation. We had this, I drafted this at the last meeting. We indicated that people had recommended changes to recommend them prior to May 31st. There was no change last week. There was not additional feedback. So what this agenda item is really the last opportunity for anybody to provide the subcommittee, which is Dick, Kay, and myself, with any additional thoughts or recommendations before we embark on the process. As you can see, there's a timeline laid out. There's 2 phases. There's self-evaluation, and then there is a board and key agency leaders and staff component to it. Assuming approval today, we'll start the process, we'll be contacting individual board members, and sticking to the timeline that's outlined here. Does anybody on the board have any questions?
Well, I didn't know if there was any opportunity to at least solicit input from others beyond that. I mean, there's nothing here that lets an individual school superintendent or, somebody that's been kind of at the other end of dealing with us. And so I know we can't go out and contact all of them, that's not realistic, but is there some way to publish a notice or something, anybody who's got something to say, send it to Julie?
Ron, I was thinking exactly the same lines that, I think it would be all very, very positive from my take on the job, what Nancy's done, but I'm thinking the whole education community isn't really represented here. You've got board members, you've got superintendents, so you're talking COSA, OSBA, whether or not it's a huge event of surveying, I wouldn't necessarily encourage that, but maybe it's a focus group type thing where we give an opportunity to provide some feedback, or even they synthesize a report or something back.
So one of the things, the reason why we landed with this list, so I'm open to either a focus group or some general, of course, if anybody had any input, we accept it.
Right.
One of the thoughts is that this board is a fairly representative group, and that we would likely look to individual board members to, they come obviously with their own personal point of view, but they're also likely to be able to represent other members. For example, I would expect that Hannah Mandarin would bring sort of a teacher's perspective there. So we did consider that as something that we would not just be getting the board, but we'd be getting the board and all the multiple perspectives. They may bring the people who they may do focus groups, so individual board members could also ask.
Now, I agree, and that's why I'm not suggesting any particular process so that you put any energy into chasing people down.
But just a general.
Just like the newspaper or the state equivalent of a federal register notice is, you got some 30 days or something if you care about the subject, send your comments here.
Okay.
I like, Madam Chair, I like Ron's idea. I think that the more we build possible inputs, the greater the social capital gain is from this, and the more feeling amongst folks throughout the state that say, oh, I can participate in this, even if they choose not to. So I like Ron's idea in terms of open.
And I think this is a good thing. It's almost a value add. If we go about and we do that, we ask for that feedback, we'll get as much an evaluation on OEIB as we will Chief Ed Officer.
Don't get Dick going.
And that's but really when we look at feeling about OEIB, I just went through this process internally with our ESDs, and that's what the executive director evaluation turned into the whole organization evaluation. So I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think that's going to emerge as we start looking at the feedback and the things coming back to us. That's a natural byproduct.
So we had this discussion at the subcommittee level, and I think that's an important conversation to have with the broader community. I think we, as a body, need to make sure that we're clear that this is an evaluation process of an individual versus of us. So I would want Dr. Golden to have to own all of us. So I think it's a good conversation. We talked about maybe covering that in the retreat that we have scheduled for August. So just in light of the comments, maybe what I would suggest is that we come up with a general, some opportunity that people get, the public, if they wanted to provide feedback, could. And then I could also, I'll ask individual board members when we have conversations with them around evaluation, if they have individuals they would like us to speak with as part of the process.
Be careful about that last part. If we start giving you a list of here 20 people, I think you should call. You're never going to get that.
well, we're not,
kind of
I'm not committing to speaking to them all, but I think if there's a representative sample, or if we feel like we're missing, there's some sort of gap. And the other reason why I wouldn't commit is really this is, it's one of our primary responsibilities as a board. So we need to own both the process and the contents of the evaluation.
In terms of owning the process, Madam Chair, I'd like to move this forward.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Next, Julia. Nancy, preparing for the retreat.
Okay, well, Julia, you kind of started us off on that a little bit. If you look under tab 7, this is just draft. OEIB team started thinking about things we wanted in the retreat, but what's really important to me is that it's your retreat, so I'm going to go around and ask each of you. Julia, when you were talking about the evaluation, is it the public feedback you were thinking of in the retreat when you?
No, when I was, had conversations about the evaluation, since our committee's assignment is primarily the evaluation of the chief education officer, how do we assess, as a board, not individual board members, but as a board, what's working, what's not, what are our challenges, how are we perceived in terms of effectiveness, how effective are we, or a sort of self-reflection as a group on where we've been and where we want to go.
Yeah, so that might be good if you look at the first, not the roll call, but number 2, core purpose and value conversation. I think you could combine these two, because what that's really about is, again, we articulating the purpose of OEIB is, you'll have had by that time sort of my self-assessment of all the policies we think we've brought forward and stuff like that in terms of, but now it's a question of, what's really, from your perspective, seeing what we've done, what is really the value of OEIB, and what are we all going to commit to as the value? And we would bring some documents to you that articulate, this was a law that passed and what was assumed, and then what we've also committed to. So that would be one suggestion. Then the second, I'll just go through this and I'll go around to each of you. The second is we do have a strategic plan, and it does have kind of red, yellow, or green. How are we doing in terms of meeting the strategic plan? I also have my own plan based on helping you accomplish your plan, so we could look at that. We thought there were 2 things that, because we're not having a July meeting, we thought were important to talk about. One is the statewide longitudinal database, just because it's part of the law that we created that. I would say it's time to get it done. I would say that. And then the second is the Minority Teacher Act, and when we look at equity as being a major, what we would call umbrella, an important thing to us. We have heard so many times about the importance of getting teachers that reflect our students, and we've been working on that, and there's a report due, but we really would like to just share that with you as part of the strategic plan. Then, another job of the OEIB is barrier analysis. So what we would have is, you would have already talked about your value and core purpose. We would have looked at a strategic plan, and we would provide to you a document that, based on the policies or investments that we believe we are making or have made, how are we doing on overcoming barriers and what barriers remain. I think if you just looked at the presentations today, if much of this was implemented, we'd be overcoming some barriers, but some barriers still do remain. So we think that's a big part of the conversation. The next part is really, we're in the middle of the budgeting process, and we're working, this is a process that's really led by Danny in the governor's office, and also it's a partnership with all of us. Across the pathway from birth to college and career. So We will have policy recommendations, and then we'll actually have investment recommendations. Now, those investment recommendations will go through your committee, outcome and investment committee, but that's a subcommittee of the whole board, so we do want to bring them all to you. We want you to be able to prioritize them and have a deeper conversation about that, and that's part of a longer process we've shared with you before. And then, we always want to think about just expanding board member engagement. What do you need from us to keep you feeling as engaged as you could possibly feel? And we've been working on this year, but it can probably get better, you know what I mean, in terms of our responsibility to you. So those were things we suggested. So can we go around and just see, starting just with the board. So Nicole, you look like you want to speak.
I think the agenda items under the strategic plan are great. I actually think it's probably time to really update our strategic plan goals on equity. Those goals were created prior to having the equity lens, and I think I would just encourage us to just probably update, all of that. I think it's probably time for more of a concrete element in the strategic plan that engages equity across Q20s. That'd be a wonderful part of the conversation. I also, really support the two call-outs you have. And everything else is good.
Pretty much echoing what Nicole said, and for me, number 4 is a biggie in terms of barrier analysis, because sometimes you start down a course of action and you think you know where the barriers are, and you think you have something to negotiate them, and you realize that you probably need something else or more of, or maybe a bulldozer to remove that barrier. So I like what you've got here, and I see this as being a very good way to spend our time.
Nancy, I really liked the scorecard that you gave earlier in the fall. We saw what we were doing, how far we've come along, how much work we have. I'd like to see that, and really hit in our indicators that we're here for, those transition points. What's our plan? What's our data for the KRA? What do we hope it'll be next fall? Where are we with 3rd grade reading? What do we hope it's going to be next fall? Where are we with high school graduate, etc. I'd love to see the concrete data points. Where are we? What are our targets? And the scorecard encompasses. I also think we need some strategy for 2000, we sunset. Where are we with that? What's our strategy from OEIB's perspective on our future? I think that bears a conversation at the retreat. I think we should really review our subcommittee structure and just check in with the staff. I would like to hear how the chairs feel about how it's going. I'd like to hear how the staffers feel it's going with our various subcommittee work. Then I do think also we're at a point where, we started this with 4-year terms. Do we have a sustainability plan? That kind of gets into the 2000, the sunset conversation as well. Is what's our sustainability plan? We've had varying rates of attendance, participation. People are busy. I do think it's time as a board we take a look at that, and that which gets right into the subcommittee work as well, is our engagement and our sustainability.
I would echo Mark's conversation about the value conversation, because I think that's tied to the sunset conversation. And what's our value added? Are we still necessary? And if so, what's the strategy, both legislative and with the government? And other than that, I echo the other comments.
I'm smiling because Mark sounds like a car dealer. I didn't realize he's such a highly educated person selling cars.
You're rubbing off on him.
Yes.
I want it to be my second career.
Well, I'd like to see, when Peter showed us about 2 or 3 meetings ago that laminated, the aspirational goal thing, I'm telling you, it's really, I've done this unconsciously, but this really makes sense to me, is what is our goal saying? I want to know how are we doing this? Mark outline, which is really right on the money. Mark, I really love the way you said it. I want to know where we are. When are we going to get to the top 10? This is a question I'm asked all the time outside of this room. And so, and then obviously it's going to take hard work to get there, but just want to know how we're doing it and how long it's going to take for us to do it. What are those, the scoreboard that we have has really been, I think, is excellent. We really hone in on that. And the self-evaluation on are we staggered on our membership here? You know, we should have some people going off, you know, and that type of thing. Kind of, whatever that is. But you know, really get down in the seriousness of improving what we're all about. And we have that opportunity to do that because time is clicking on with our young people. So it has a lot to do with the vitality of the state. You know, that's kind of a drum roll, but that's actual fact. And so we need to do that.
So I agree with most of the comments that have already been made. And I guess I'm reading more, some of the more linear of the agenda. So like reviewing the core purpose and value conversation, I think we need to like connect that definitely with what our goals are. So purpose, value, but goals. And this would also connect in the strategic plan as an update or review and assessment against the legislative goals that are laid out for us. Because I just think there was expectations relating to alignment, integration, this sort of seamless system. So how are we doing against that? And just to sort of follow along with that, the barrier analysis. I have the second half would be strategies to overcome. So I think we've done a pretty thorough analysis of already of what barriers exist, but getting into the end, therefore, what strategies and investments we're going to make to go set up against that. And I guess a larger sort of philosophical question is sort of the value add. So what is our value add? So try and focus or set things up for this next year of our work being not on work that other people are doing, but you know, it's, I think the transition points or the larger spectrum and milestones would be the key piece, but sort of to try and get rid of some of the work that's duplicative of other bodies.
So you made this agreement, well, when the governor started all this, it was all, you know, state of urgency, status quo isn't working, our results are terrible, we gotta be radical, really gotta make changes. I still feel like we spend 80 or 90% of our time discussing the aspirational goals and talking about, are we actually getting anything done?
Yeah.
And I'd really like to reverse that. I'd really like, you know, we've got a strategic plan. It's a good strategic plan. Can we tinker with it? Sure, we can tinker with it forever. Can we keep making better goals? Yeah, we can make better goals. I'd rather put all that discussing. They're good enough. Let's focus on actually getting them done. And I don't see much of that. And so when we have this discussion about what's our purpose, what's our value add, should we be, to me, that's the whole thing is there something we can do here to actually make some of this stuff happen instead of just keep talking about it? And so I know that sounds harsh, but it's my sense. It goes straight to your, you know, the expanding board member engagement. I'm not very interested in sitting through more presentations on our aspirations. I'm real interested in talking about how we're going to get things done.
You know, and just to kind of segue into that, I think, you know, we're all saying that in different ways. We don't feel that urgency. We've also sustained all the norming and storming in the formation. When you look back on when we all started here with original Senate Bill 909, who was in the room, there are a lot of us that have weathered through it all and are pushing forward. But I think maybe, Nancy, what we do, I would rather have some real hard conversations like what we're kind of getting to right now in that retreat than to spend a lot of time with the strategic plan. It is good, but I like what Ron is saying is maybe let's go back to look at 909. Our original, are we doing what the original intent of OEIB was? Because we really did take a bit of a movement away from when we what we thought we were starting on to where we are now. And I don't say that's a bad thing, but I do think it is time to check. Sorry about that. You'll like this, Dick. It's time to check the oil after a couple years.
You are converting him, my God, Dick. He sounded like sitting next to you.
Well, anything with a motor I want. Anything with a motor I want. So,
but it would be really nice to just think about building some portion of the agenda to really spend some time reflecting and thinking about how the last 4 years of work are sort of being experienced by parents and families and communities, and just how some of our aspirations and thinking are being received really at the school level. I don't know what that looks like or what that feels like, but as someone who's going through the process of signing up and starting kindergarten at a North Portland elementary school, PPS, and just seeing what they're experiencing every day or being a parent in that process, it's really clear to me that at the ground level, there's lots of places where folks have no idea that any of these conversations are happening. And I'm just curious if we could, I'm not sure, I don't have an idea of what that agenda item looks like, and I know that's a K-12 focused suggestion. I think we should figure out how to make it larger than that, but I think that would be important for us to try to figure out how to ground it in the people who are actually experiencing the changes we are implementing. Some portion.
Well, to me, that raises another piece that sort of, and again, this isn't a well-formed, but it's not clear to me how, other than a reorganization, higher education has been as much of our focus as it needs to be. I'm not laying that on higher education, although there's stuff to go around. And I think we need to raise this, I think. Let me clarify that. To my own sector, to the universities. We've had a lot of participation from community college, from everything from dual credit discussions, etc. But we agreed when we started that this was going to be a PK through 20 arrangement. And I can be missing this, but I'm not sure we've had either discussions or the kinds of action that have taken us where we need to go from the OEIBs. I love what the HEC is doing. I love the reorganization and the things that are happening within that. But there's some considerations that we have to, I think we have to chew on a little bit.
Well, I got feedback.
Yeah,
That's
You shall receive.
You've got about 3 or 4 days.
Well, yeah, how many days are we on? No.
6 weeks.
I really do appreciate it, and I see how big chunks of these can fit together. What I'll do is, I'll bring back a revised proposal and the amount of time I think it would take to do that. And then if we all can't fit it into what we think is probably a long day, then otherwise what we can do is I can really start showing if we can't fit everything in there, how could we move it through the meetings in some way. So I really do appreciate the feedback, and I'll get back to you next time. So
That's
we'll-
August
next time.
12th,
Oh, the next time
right?
is the retreat.
Is the
You
retreat.
would
August
be
12th.
hearing from me.
Yeah. We'll leave
I'll
it
put
in your
together
capable
the-
hands.
Okay, yeah. You'll be getting information about the retreat. You'll see there if it reflects your input, but it will, so.
Thank you, everyone. So now we're moving to subcommittee updates. And first is best practices and student transitions. And Mark, I understand you're going to report on behalf of the one.
Yeah, make it just really quickly. We had a productive meeting today, even though it wasn't that well attended. We did have some great participation on the phone. We really hit a couple things. We had a presentation from the Developmental Education Work Group with Elizabeth Cox-Brand. They have been working throughout the year and have just done a great job dealing with the issue of remediation. How are we going to move away from what's not working with our students as they get through the system and transition to higher ed? So they have some great recommendations. I think we're all excited for it, ready to finalize that and roll that out to us. We also talked about the instructional assistant career pathway. It's a pathway for our parapros and training programs for the instructional assistants who play a pretty vital role in the schools and transitioning to them into teaching careers. And again, that's part of the Oregon Minority Pipeline vision that we have have our teaching force, our parapro force, that is more representative of our kids. And then our final one, we worked on our best practices and our committee transition recommendations to give on what are our priorities. We've been working on these throughout the year that we believe are, and we divided them up into what are investments and what are policy changes. So we are just about getting there. Hilda has been amazing as far as getting these docs to us, and it was a productive meeting. We're ready to move forward. We're looking forward to sharing our recommendations with you.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions for Mark? Nicole?
Great. I'm going to take a little bit of a longer time period because I actually want to take a moment and share and solicit feedback for a policy recommendation that has been created by the Equity and Partnership Committee. Most of you were here when we invited several groups to come and present on GED and the opportunity for GED completion, as well as the changing standards for what is now known as the new GED and the GED honors system. And I want to start by saying, first and foremost, that as our Equity and Partnership Committee has worked on this, we have always been very clear that our first hope is, of course, that we will improve K-12 so that we will not have an issue where we are losing lots of youth, and it is not our desire to create another system that will somehow take the place of K-12 and successfully graduating our Oregon youth. The reality is, though, that 1 out of every 4 Oregon youth are not completing a high school diploma or a GED in 5 years. And certainly we can understand that in order to reach 40-40-20, students must first complete that high school diploma or that GED diploma. And so even though GED is something that's very important to the success of the entire OEIB, it certainly does not just live within the Equity Committee. We decided to really take it on as an important issue because students of color and low-income students are so incredibly overrepresented in the population of students who do not have the opportunity to complete that 4-year degree. Essentially, what we have outlined under the leadership of Peter is a policy really reflecting a series of beliefs, a series of recommendations, and an outline of some strategic policy investments. Essentially, what we've laid out in this policy recommendation is our sort of best work to this point, and we also recognize that we really need your continued input and perspective. We had a working meeting last week, and the document that you see before us is entirely different than the document that we started with. Nancy and her team does a great job getting materials out to folks way ahead of time. We were still working on this yesterday afternoon, and we suspect it will continue to evolve. As I said, we're really looking for your feedback because we would like to really adopt this policy at the next full OEIB meeting. And after today, we would also like to really go out and speak with a variety of business, industry, education, nonprofit, and community college stakeholders and continue to really get their feedback as well to improve the document. What we've really outlined is a vision that recognizes the current state of affairs, which is 1 out of 4 students not completing in 5 years, and also this recognition that this is an important pathway to reach 40-40-20, and really a clear perspective that the ultimate goal for students within what we refer to as a shoreline is really career and college readiness. And it's certainly our perspective that students completing their GED would not just be oriented to the 20% of the 40-40-20. We think it's very important that they are reflected across. The other thing that's really important to recognize is that the GED and the GED Honors Program, it is the credential that Oregon has identified. We have no other credential outside of high school diploma. So I think that's an important clarifying point. And so with that, we have really looked at creating that vision, being really clear about OEIB's role in this work. While we think there's a significant need to provide leadership and create alignment around all of those systems to work together, we also recognize that we are the policy body, and many of the recommendations that we're actually making would really depend on other partners and other systems making some of those improvements. The other piece that's important is that we relied heavily on the work of Kate Brown and her team, as well as City Club, and really incorporating their recommendations. So this is not all our original work. And similarly to the Equity Committee, we created a variety of belief statements that we really reflect or begin to reflect the best thinking about what our young people in Oregon deserve. So rather than reading through the whole document, I'm actually going to focus on those belief statements. And so I'm going to go through some of the ones that I think are really important. And so let's see if you can just turn to the second page. So we said we believe the K-12 system is working to increase the number of students who complete high school. However, the 25% of youth without a diploma must be served with improved systems. We believe that a significant number of opportunity youth require more and better options to demonstrate high school content attainment and achieve college and career readiness. We actually are very clear that we're not interested in a pipeline approach. We feel like a pipeline approach is very limiting, and for the purpose of serving these students and meeting their needs, we're much more interested in a term that Dr. Henley brought to our attention, which is the shoreline approach.
Which is what? Multiple points of access, multiple points of egress.
So when you think about a pipeline, that's a very linear, more of a Eurocentric worldview, and there's, sort of like, what do you do if you fall out of a pipeline? Whereas a shoreline, there are many opportunities over time and many different strategies to find success. There's a recognition that the GED is our current credential, although you will see later that we actually recommend that over time we look at other possibilities for credentialing. We are definitely appreciative of the new standards and the honors GED, but we think that the state of Oregon really never took the opportunity to look at all of the different options, and we think that should happen at some point in the future. I think the most important belief in all of these recommendations is actually on the top of page 3, which is we believe it is the responsibility of the governing bodies to solve barriers, not the students' responsibility to navigate confusing systems. And I'm not going to read through the rest as I'm exceeding my time, but I think it would be important for board members to look at those. It's very possible we have missed important belief systems, but you will see in summary that we have made some clear statements about the importance of higher education as a partner, the importance of really rebranding the GED so that it's something that people understand the value of, and that there's a pathway beyond just completing that GED to other certificates in higher education. Then you'll see that we actually went through and created a series of recommendations, some of which would be under the purview of OEIB, but actually the majority of these recommendations would actually be best implemented by CCWD and other important partners. And then you'll see at the end that we're actually proposing 3 resource recommendations. The first being to create, this is actually a resource neutral recommendation, but really this recommendation to create stronger leadership and alignment. Right now you have community colleges, nonprofits, folks in high school, many of them doing great work around GED attainment, but they're totally disconnected. There's not an alignment around data collection, and so we're recommending stronger alignment and leadership around that. The second recommendation is really, we're being careful to use the word pilot as it's overused, if you will, but we would like to really see an expansion or piloting of some of the best practices we have seen around GED completion, which is really strong partnerships in the community to provide wraparound services in a culturally responsive way to really meet the students and young folks beyond just testing. And then recommendation number 3 is really around lowering the cost barriers for students to complete their GED with a particular focus on low-income students and high-risk students. With each of these recommendations, we have a much more in-depth kind of, there's the form, and we are in progress on all of those pieces. But those are the 3 concrete recommendations that we are making. So I would open the conversation up to my fellow committee members. I'm sure I've missed something. I'll also thank Peter for really doing a tremendous job in taking all of our work last week in helping to move this policy recommendation forward. But if committee members have anything to share, or the full OEIB, we would love your input either today or going forward so that we can bring forward the best possible policy recommendation at our next full meeting.
Just as a committee member, I just thought one thing to add, and this sort of goes back to the conversation about the retreat, really sort of linking all our work back to what we're charged to do. And I mean, I think this in some ways is a huge piece of what we're charged to do. This is the 20. Or it's the number, the fourth number that really should be there because of where we are right now. So I think as we frame all these things up, again, putting it within the context of what we've been charged to do. And I think the other thing I'd want to say is there was just for the purposes of people who aren't on the committee, there was a discussion about the investments in this in no ways designed to lessen expectations and support and the work that's happening at the high school graduates. Ultimately, we hope that we don't have to this goes away.
We would love to be in a position where we have empty testing centers because folks are successfully completing high school.
But until we do, we need an option for completion. This is one more avenue of completion. Is it what we want? No, but it's where we are. And I would really like us to consider from OEIB, if we start counting these sorts of forms toward completion of high school, so that we can compare apples to apples with other states. We get beaten up over our graduation rate because other states include GEDs, modified, other types of diplomas. And when we keep hearing that statistic, I'm kind of going off here, we keep hearing that statistic that we're 48, I keep reading that in Oregonian, when other states use these forms of completion. We get tired of it. That doesn't mean we don't need to increase our high school graduation rates, we know that. But when we look at our success rate of 5-year completions, when we look at our success rate of other types of forms, we need to compare apples to apples and how we're doing it. And I think that gets to how are we doing with OEIB and all of our changes. Is our graduation, completion, dial moving? There it is.
I think that pathway to completion, there's a value there. There's also a cost by non-payment. And so I think when we're presented with the document of this, we should also put the economics in there. So I think it's pretty significant to make the public, the community who needs to support this, on what the value is on supporting this.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm sure you'll get feedback on this. Outcomes and investments, Dick.
Yes. It'll be very, very short, actually. If you read Nancy Golden's last Friday report to us from the desk of the CEO of our, she outlined pretty inclusively what the subcommittee was, investment and outcome subcommittee was all about in her spiel. So we're currently processing a hearing of proposals from each agency, including the ELC, Oregon Youth Department Council, Oregon Department of Education, Higher Education Coordinating Commission, for bringing presenters to the full board. And we'll do this later this summer, of course. And she outlined what that was about. Each agency will also be presenting at least one strategy to reduce costs, which is really significant, or repurpose of resources and detain how we'll use public input to define and form the budget proposals. So we'll have a proposal. Are we going to do that at the retreat?
Yes.
Yeah, at the retreat. We also meet this coming Thursday at 9 o'clock at the Fred Ford Room, and go from there.
Next, any questions for Dick? Okay, then let's move on to our agency report. Ben.
Thank you, Chair Spiley. So for the HEC, you know, when Eric Meslow from ETIC described the fact they were looking for a home and decided to stay away from HEC because they wanted to stay out of the fray, I was puzzled, so I looked up what fray means. It means a situation of intense activity, typically one incorporating an element of aggression or competition. Well, okay, that's not a bad descriptor of life in higher education, at least some of the time. We are rapidly approaching the magical date of July 1st, which under the legislation that was passed in 2013 is the data that a whole bunch of things occur formally that have been processed for a while. One of them is the establishment of full authorization of institutional governing boards at our 3 largest public universities. So those boards which have been appointed and have been meeting since late last year will actually take formally the reins of those institutions. It's likewise the date upon which CCWD and OSAC will come under the HEC umbrella, so their rules and their sort of governance of those state agencies will be established by the HEC, and their directors will report to me. So all of that also occurs on July 1st. A couple of personnel notes that are of interest. First, on the OSAC front, we confirmed Bob Baru's appointment as continuing executive director. On the CCWD front, you've gotten to know our interim director, Gerald Hamilton, starting in October. Gerald will go back to retirement July 1st. Starting in October, Jim Middleton will come on board as our commissioner for community colleges, reporting to me into the HAC and working closely with all of us on community college related issues. And Jim, of course, has been a long-time president of Central Oregon Community College and a real leader in education there and around the state. Finally, you may have noted, if you were sort of on your emails during this meeting, that the Oregon University System announced the appointment of that Melody Rose has been hired to be the next president of Barrelhurst University. And so she'll be leaving her post as chancellor in July, and the board will be looking, I presume the Board of Higher Education will be looking for someone to finish up the job there as that organization at the Oregon University System, the chancellor's office, winds down over the next year. It's over the next year, of course, that the sort of final transitions will take place, and new boards will be established at the other 4 public universities, and the transition to statewide responsibilities that have to be completed. So a lot of my work and a lot of my report has to do with these organizational changes and the ongoing development of an integrated agency, the HEC, that encompasses CCWD and OSAC portions of our university system. And one of the ways of expressing that concretely is that we're putting together for the first time this data integrated higher education data and research group that includes the folks at CCWD led by Elizabeth Cox-Brand, who met with one of the subcommittees this morning, and then also incorporates folks from the Oregon University Systems Bob Keary and his team. We'll have a single higher education data repository related to student success, which will be exciting to see how that works across post-secondary. Looking forward, just a lot of focus on budget and policy, of course, for 2015. A few, sort of 3 emphases, I think, for the HEC as we look at 40-40-20 and higher education and what needs to occur. Number 1, we touched on earlier today, it really is affordability. And the focus, as you heard, will be principally, I think, around the first 2 years, focusing state aid and institutional support in order to really get closer to, if not all the way to that promise of affordability for some students. It's likewise on capacity. 40-40-20 demands more students in higher education and more capacity, and that's likely to be expressed by the HEC through in part through our recommendations for state investment in capital at community colleges and universities. The third category is the most important, and I'll put it in quotation marks, but it's productivity. Because as institutions become more successful with the students who they have, so as the Oregon University System schools increase their retention and completion rates from today's 55% average to, say, 60%, the national average, actually national is more like 57, 58, even a 2% increase in completion rates will buy down the cost of that capacity expansion and frankly make it more affordable too, because students will have fewer students who are graduating or leaving school with debt and not a degree. So a lot of emphasis on the productivity piece. What that means concretely is bringing forward a budget request for the governor's consideration. And here I just want to note, it's sort of old hat, and I know we get tired of hearing of it, but it's so stark in higher education what the history of funding in this state that it bears repeating. We have flatlined, if you look at actual dollars back to 1999, 15 years ago, it's the same amount of state investment today as in 1999, not inflation, but absolute dollars. Meanwhile, enrollment has is up 54% in our universities and more in our community colleges. So that's what we're looking at, massive increases in enrollment, flat state funding, and of course, that will be reflected in a budget request, I think, that at least suggests to folks that we're going to need to invest more in order to reach the outcomes. But there's also, and so that's sort of the how much question, but then the HEC has this unique responsibility to decide how to allocate resources to our institutions. So at whatever level, what are we getting? How do we allocate it? So for what are those dollars spent? And here the work underway is to adopt by the end of this year changes to our allocation formulas for community colleges and public universities that shift at least in part and over a period of transition time from enrollment to outcomes so that there's a more clear direction of state resources towards outcomes. And we think, as a strategic matter, there's a relationship between the two, that funding more clearly in outcomes is also likely to build a better case for increasing public investment in higher education. If all of that is sort of too squishy and abstract as it is, I know when I go home and try to tell my 6-year-old about this work, she gets a little but a couple of really exciting things happening this spring, very concrete, that the HEC is helping to lead. One, a FAFSA outreach and completion project, so the federal application for federal student aid, free application for federal student aid, we're working with 10 high schools. This actually work's winding up now to engage and connect with more Oregon students, particularly underrepresented ones, so that they are applying for, in particular, the Pell Grant. It's federal dollars, it's not limited, it's only limited on the basis of income, but if you qualify, you get it. So we're hoping to see from this pilot project this spring an uptick in those schools of the number of Oregonians who are applying for federal financial aid. Working with the U.S. Department of Ed, so we're able to tell the schools who's applied and who hasn't, so they can better target their efforts. And then in the 14-15 school year, we'll be working with private and public colleges and universities on a pilot project around credit for prior learning, so that more students are being awarded credit in higher education for knowledge and skills and learning that's occurred at a workplace, in the military, or through other prior experiences, but not in a formal higher education setting. So that's some of what's already underway. Could talk at length about efforts around developmental education redesign, which was touched on earlier, some of the equity work, CTE support, and ways in which that's likely to be reflected in our budget funding requests. But I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm excited about the months to come as we move towards 2015.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions, comments? It's a full plate we have. Okay, now it's time for public comments. I want to remind those members of the public who would like to speak that we have a limitation of 3 minutes. The board will not hear personal complaints concerning personnel in a particular agency, nor will we respond directly, but ask our Chief Education Officer to respond at her discretion. SEC full time, and Donna Coleman, welcome.
Thanks. I'm Donna Cohen. I was a technology education teacher, and I have a master's in vocational education administration. The STEM discussion was very stimulating for me, and I've been sitting on a lot of feelings, and so I'm going to go off script somewhat, and I hope that you will indulge me if I just slightly go over. Mr. Saxton said that we make science and math unsexy. I want to tell you how we make it sexy. The T-E in STEM. Engineering is the application of science and math to real life. It's using your imagination to design a real object to solve a problem. The technology is knowing the use of the tools, the equipment, the processes to actually build the project. I wish every high school could have a STEM facility in the center of the school with glass walls, at least in some places, so that every student in the school would walk by and see projects being built. That's the sexy. That's where the kids have fun, enjoy it, and find the reason.
We're sorry, your conference is ending now. Please hang up.
Okay. So that's where it's all math and science brought to life, okay? By the way, I've discovered a lot of people don't know what a technology educator is, so I attached my expired license, my endorsement. We don't exist a whole lot anymore, which is a great problem, which I'm going to mention. As I've been reading a lot of the literature from the state on STEM and other literature, but in particular with the state, there seems to be a great emphasis on bringing in industry people to be teaching the technology and engineering part. That's a real problem. You bring somebody from industry who has a knowledge of a discrete job area. Okay, in the TE part of STEM, students are going to be building a whole range of projects with different tools and equipment based on different science and math principles. That's what a technology education teacher knows. Now you can bring in an industry person at times. When I taught bridge building, I brought in a civil engineer to explain what he did and to show that real life occupation. But the person who's going to be able to deliver though that range of skills to the kids and the teaching ability is a tech ed teacher. So I'm not going to, as I mentioned, I'm not going to read this. You can read some of the things I'm leaving out. So the missing piece of STEM, as I see it here, is the technology educators. And what can we do about that? First of all, we have to recognize it. I mean, people just literally, I talked to the principal of my local high school the other day. She had never heard of it. So we need to bring back just the consciousness of the fact that there are people who, like myself, who went to OSU and took not only professional ed classes, but classes in sheet metal and power mechanics and all the kinds of things that I've listed here. I've compiled from 3 different college programs in tech ed or tech engineering ed, same
We're
thing.
at 3 minutes now, just so you know.
Okay, I'm just about to wrap up. So, and it's also, we need to bring back a tech ed program in Oregon. Okay, a teacher training program in this area, and also make sure we have women and minorities represented in those schools. So that's basically it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Questions or anything?